Okay, you saw the video about free market capitalism and the advantages and disadvantages. Individuals controlling output and price and wage based on supply and demand, wealth creation, but with the problems created through uneven distributions of wealth and a lack of incentive and input from large communities of the economy. Pros and cons. In the end, as I said before, unchecked pure capitalism was a disaster for America, and that's why we ended up having the progressive movement, and we ended up having the New Deal, and then 50 years of trying to fix those problems. Okay, well, as horrible as pure unchecked capitalism is, pure unchecked socialism, which is what we also call a command economy, can also be horrible. So these, just like in life sometimes, when we go really far one way or really far the other, we tend to create more problems than we're trying to solve. And we'll talk about what America does and what other countries that are successful do, and what works and what doesn't, and then you can be a more informed citizen and hopefully have more perspective on some solutions. But pure socialism is an economic system where the government determines the output, prices, and wages. There are few decisions made by individuals. So in socialism, the government's controlling stuff. So anytime the government has an intervention or regulation or a program that deals with the economy at all, it's socialist. Now, pure socialism is when the government does all of that all of the time. Okay? And we've seen this in like Cuba, we've seen the Soviet Union, we've seen it in China, all that's kind of changed. We've seen North Korea, although that's sort of had that's been like socialism that's kind of manifested into fascism. It's really, North Korea is a weird example. Probably the best example of a country that's tried it as close to what Marx wanted is probably Cuba. And they've had some successes there in some regards. They've got great health care and things, but they've got mass poverty, and there's always problems that come along with socialism, pure socialism. Okay? Now, the advantages to pure socialism would be an increased effort towards some kind of equality, right? So in Cuba, a doctor makes almost the same amount as a janitor. Okay, and so what that tends to do is it tends to take away incentive. Although, ironically, there are more doctors per capita in Cuba than America, where we pay our doctors the most. But there tends to be less incentive, and they are trying to move you towards equality, giving you housing, giving you a job. So this is the goal of this government control, is to sort of create a society through force. Okay, and another advantage is the economy can actually adjust super quickly in times of chaos or distress. And I'll give you a perfect example. The pandemic is a perfect example. In the pandemic, China, which is essentially a dictatorship where the government controls not everything, but lots and lots of stuff. When the pandemic broke out there, they put massive, crazy, totalitarian sort of fixtures on the Hubei province in Wuhan to stop this thing before it could get out. Now, to be fair, China's government lies a lot, so we actually don't know how many people were infected or died, but we do know it didn't spread like it has in America, where we are used to not listening to anybody, doing our own thing, having more freedoms. And you can see in countries that has had more sort of, the government's had a little more control, they can do that a little bit faster. Another example of this is like during World War II, our government took over our economy basically, and we went in a very short time to not making that many military goods to making an insane amount of military goods, which helped us win the war. So that is what America did in World War II as a way to win. So you can turn on a dime real quickly because individuals don't have to be compelled to change. The government says you're going to do what we say. So those are two advantages. Two disadvantages, though, or a couple of disadvantages. Obviously, there's a huge lack of wealth creation. There's just not much wealth is being created when you don't have incentive and consumers and output. So there's not much wealth being created. Another one, this is a huge one, is there just isn't much freedom. There isn't a lot of economic freedom. You don't have the choice to do what you want in terms of starting a company or doing what you want or working where you want. There's not much freedom there, right? So that's one of the worst parts of socialism is there's less economic freedom. And then, as I mentioned before, there's less incentive to invent, there's less incentive to innovate, and so that's pretty horrible. So pure socialism is pretty bad, pure capitalism is pretty bad. So what do we have is we have a mixed economy. We have government regulations that try to make sure that we don't have too much pollution. Ironically, the things that are socialist are some of the most popular things in America, although people who claim to say socialism is the worst tend to not acknowledge it. Social Security is socialist. Medicare is socialist. Medicaid is socialist. Our military is socialist. Our police is socialist. Our firefighters is socialist. Are socialist. Public schools is a socialist institution. All of these things are socialist, and so that doesn't mean they're good or bad. It just means it's what it is, right? So our military is a socialist institution paid for by the government. People make the same money on every single level. Like all captains make this over a certain range. If you bump up, you make more money. But the private doesn't make the same as a general, but generals tend to make in a range the same thing. It's not necessarily based on how well you do. It's just based on where you are. Same thing with us. I make more than a beginning teacher, and that teacher will move up and I will move up. But if I do my job incredibly well and somebody who's been here for 40 years does their job horribly, they still make more money than I do. All right? So in the military, if you got two sergeants and one of them's awesome and one of them's horrible, and they've both been in there for 5 years and they're the same rank, they get paid the same, right? It's controlled by the government. So all of those things, firefighting, police, schools, military, and then Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these things, NASA, all of this stuff is socialist. Doesn't mean it's good or it's bad, it's just what it is, right? But we also have free markets, so you can choose to create your own businesses and go off on your own and innovate and do what you want. You have economic freedom. So we try to have a balance of the two, right? One of the things that America lacks is universal health care. A lot of people have argued that if our health care was not given to us by our employers, Americans would feel more free to go do different things because we wouldn't be bound by one employer giving us benefits. I know people who work just for the insurance. Those people would like to go do other things and be creative and create markets and stuff, but they feel bound because of the insurance thing. So sometimes, the ironic part about this is that sometimes we can have a more vibrant market economy if we have some regulations, right? If we teach schools better, we can have a more vibrant economy. So, and sometimes the more our economic freedom with capitalism gives us funds, then we can do things that the government can do things that benefit people. So if done well, they can feed into each other if managed well. It just doesn't always happen because politicians oftentimes fight and they sort of take these varying sides that tend to be less productive than looking at sort of what works, what provides freedom, and what provides benefit for people. And so it's complex. Both sides tend to demonize the other, and that's not helpful. So if you are trying to make a decision about one thing or the other, it's important to make sure that demonizing socialists or demonizing capitalists isn't helpful. You need to see what's working and what doesn't, what's providing freedom, what's providing opportunity, and see what works and what's most efficient and what gets us our highest level of overall utility.